And it is found in the Gospel of Luke, the 16th chapter, and the 19th and 20th verses. And it says, there was a certain rich man which was clothed in purple and fine linen, and fared sumptuously every day. And there was a certain beggar named Lazarus, which was laid at his gate, full of sores. Our subject today is, what shall we do with Lazarus? This is a parable told by Jesus. Jesus tells parables in the Gospels, and it's wonderful and important that he tells us truths through parables. One of the reasons that is so good is that parables are not specific. They deal with principles rather than people, and those spiritual principles that they deal with need to be applied to people throughout the ages. So Jesus said there was a certain rich man who fared sumptuously every day. He was adorned, attired in fine linen, clothed in purple. This poor man named Lazarus that was laid at his gate. Now I want this Lazarus to not be a specific man that Jesus knew about. But I want this Lazarus this morning to be all the people in need that Jesus knows about. Now let me tell you one of the greatest problems in the world. And this is probably not going to be a great sermon, because it's a great sermon idea, and I don't have time to do a great sermon on it. I probably shouldn't do it at all. But one of the great problems, the greatest social problem in the world is hinted in this particular scripture, this story. The greatest social problem in the world is the natural inequality of human beings. Human beings are born unequal, and there is nothing that anybody can do to make them equal. Now, when I was a kid, I had a lot of issues with the preamble to the Constitution, because it says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And I looked around, and I did not see any evidence of this equality that the preamble talked about. But all of these grown folk, I was just 12 or 13, but all of these grown people going around saying this, and they evidently had no problem with it. So I thought, well, maybe I don't understand it, because it sounds really silly to me to say that. We live in a society where people are unequal. Kids who played on the basketball team, some were 6'6", and the others were 5'8" and 9. Well, we're not equal. So, and there is no political system that can make people equal. Socialism, Marxism, capitalism, none of those systems are going to make people equal. Because in time, whatever system you set up, those who are smarter, stronger, more energetic, born in better circumstances, are going to move to the top. I don't care whether the Republicans are in office or the Democrats. Eventually, the folks who got more going for them are going to move to the top. And you're going to always have vulnerable, weak people depending upon the compassion and goodwill of those who have more. That's why Jesus said in the scriptures, the poor you will have with you always. There's always going to be some Lazarus in the world. And the question is, in a democratic society, in a capitalistic society, in a Christian community, what will you do with Lazarus? Now, these people that Jesus tells us about, they take Lazarus and lay him at the rich man's gate. Now, there is a suggestion here. Now, notice Jesus does not condemn the rich man, but after all, later on in the parable, it says that the rich man went to hell. Now, I heard Martin Luther King talking about this one day, and he said that Dides, that's the rich man's name, Dides, did not go to hell because he was rich. He said that Dides went to hell because he maximized the minimum and minimized the maximum. Dides went to hell because he passed by Lazarus every day and never noticed him. Dides went to hell, according to Martin Luther King, because he allowed the means by which he lived to outdistance the ends for which he lived. So this is not about what happens to people who are rich after they die. This is about what happens, what do rich people do with their money before they die. So it says here that they took Lazarus and laid him at the rich man's gate, suggesting that there is a relationship between the haves and the have-nots. That there ought to be a relationship between the haves and the have-nots. And in a free society, whenever the relationship between the haves and the have-nots is not proper, you're going to have trouble, eventually chaos, and eventually insurrections. If this relationship between those who have and those who have not is not a good relationship. The compassion of those who have in an unequal society is very important to the stability of the society. So every Christian ought to be concerned about his capacity for compassion. What is your capacity for compassion? What is the degree to which you have developed your humanity that you can be concerned about the inequality that nature has imposed upon us, and then some inequality that other men have imposed upon us? Now, when we fix things, we must be careful to adhere to the Hippocratic oath. First, do no harm. And sometimes when we try to help the Lazaruses of the world, sometimes when we try to help the poor, help the vulnerable, we sometimes wind up doing more harm than good. So, one of the things we must not do when we try to help Lazarus is that we must not give people crutches that they don't need. Because when you give, and this is especially true with children, when you give people crutches that they don't need, they will develop limps that they didn't have. When you give people crutches that they don't need, they will develop limps that they didn't have. I want all the children to remember that. And when their parents try to give them stuff that they don't need, say to them, Mama, Reverend Jenkins says, if you give me crutches, Miles, that I don't need, I'll develop a limp that I didn't have. You don't want me to limp through life from now on when you're not around to take care of me, do you? So we shall not do that. Secondly, in our attempt to fix a temporary limp, we should not develop a permanent cripple. And we have to be careful about those kinds of things as we help people. Now that we've gotten a little beyond that, every Christian ought to be concerned about those folk, those individuals who need a little help to make it. I think that every individual who has means ought to spend some time trying to figure out how he or she can use those means to help folks who are less well off. I think that one of the tragedies of our time is that we have developed young people who are so selfish, so into me. I want to do my own thing. I just want to do what I want to do. And the other day it occurred to me, I have these things that I call Thoughts by William Jenkins, and I write these things down that all my young friends are begging for copies of them, and I won't give them because I don't want them to appear to know as much as I know. But one of them says, if you do what you want to do rather than the things that others want you to do, would you be any happier? Would you be any happier doing what you want to do than you are doing what other people want you to do? And you know, I have some people sometimes, I just want to do my own thing. I just want to do me. My kids say this a lot, my students. I just want to do me. I find some of the most miserable people in the world are those folks who spend their lives doing them. Because it's hard for you to give yourself any feedback for doing you. The only feedback that you get that contributes to your happiness and well-being is what you do for others. If you've had a kindly shown, said the writer, pass it on. It was not meant for thee alone. Pass it on. Let it ring throughout the years. Let it wipe another's tears until in heaven the deed appears. Pass it on. I was lucky. I was blessed to grow up around good people. You know, I think one of the tragedies of young black people, the tragedies of young black children, even the tragedy of young America, is that they don't know how good black people have been. I think that that's one of the tragedies, that young people today are looking for heroes and excited about heroes and rappers and athletes and all these people they are so excited about. They have no idea how good and decent their grandparents and great-grandparents were and are. They don't know what noble, wonderful things the older black people did to make things as well for them as they are. And they are ungrateful to the God and to the people that the God developed to give them what they have. I was fortunate to grow up around good, decent, compassionate people who did not have very much themselves, but they were not satisfied eating and seeing others hungry. Oh, I knew this woman, a woman named Miss Queen and Eddie Webster. Eddie Webster was a deacon at the church, and Miss Queen, we call her Miss Queen. To this day, I don't know what her real name is. That may be her real name. queen. They owned this big house that was near one of the cotton fields that we chopped and picked cotton in. And she had this big porch. And whenever we worked out there, she always, and they worked also, they were ordinary people, just like us. And they would come, and she always insisted to my mama. She said, we had these little bags of little brown bags of crackers and cheese. I'm ashamed to tell you all this now. You know, this great lecturer who goes all over the country lecturing at colleges and universities, and folks pay thousands of dollars for his speeches, that I once was sitting around in the cotton fields at lunchtime eating cheese and crackers. Well, you know, I guess I ought to tell it sometime, because that's a testimony to what God can do. But anyway, this woman, this queen, used to always ask my mother when we were in the field with chopping and picking cotton near their house, do your children have enough? And my mother would also, yes. And I would say, no, we don't. He got just crackers. And she would all say, oh, break them out over here. And we'd go and sit on Mrs. Queen's porch. And she always gave us food. She had to pick a big pot or something. And one day, now these were poor people, but one day I was able to go into Miss Queen's house kitchen, and I looked in her freezer. They had something called ice boxes. And I looked in that thing, and it was just running over with food. As more she gave, it seemed, the more she had. And they were compassionate people. They gave. They didn't see anybody suffer. Children were not allowed to go hungry. Older people were not allowed to be alone and go hungry, because they had compassion. I'm afraid that sometimes when God blesses people, rather than them giving more, they become more selfish and said, I'm going to keep this for myself. Now, there's another parable Jesus told. He told this parable about this man who God had blessed with a great crop. And it says, the grounds of a certain rich man brought forth plentifully. And when he assessed the bounty of his harvest, he did not say, well, I got more than I need. You know, it's very, you can tell a whole lot about a person about how he deals with his leftovers. You can tell a lot about a person about how he deals with the abundance, the stuff that he has that's more than he needs. You can tell a whole lot about a person about how they deal with that material that causes their cup to run over. This man, when his cup ran over, he said, I'm going to go out and buy me some more cups. When the barns were full, he said, I'm going to tear them down and build me bigger barns. That's what he said. I'm not going, there are poor people in town, but I'm not going to think about them now. I'm going to tear these barns down and build me better barns. There are children in town. There are orphans, and there's no social service system that takes care of them. I'm not going to concern myself about that. I'm going to tear these barns down and build me bigger barns to hold and hoard all of this material. And Jesus says, now notice how both of these parables, they end up in a very similar way. He died and went to hell. And Jesus says, God said to this man that night, you fool, I require your life, and whose will all of these things be? What shall we do with Lazarus? Shall we pass him by? Shall we say that he is not our problem? Shall we say that God made people unequal, and we should ignore that inequality? Or shall we say that Lazarus is the challenge of our humanity? Shall we say that the Lazarus among us is the challenge of our humanity? How will you ask or answer the question that Cain asked God? Am I my brother's keeper? The way you answer that question will determine what you do with Lazarus.